I have several laminates, custom thickness laminates, all about 3/16 of an inch thick. And now I want to build a sled that will be able to pass through either the planer or a wide belt sander or a drum sander to taper the thickness of these laminates. So one of the most old school ways is to shape a board, a secondary board, into a ramp or whatever shape is the opposite of the intended taper. So if I wanted to taper these guys from a 3/16 of an inch to a 1/16 of an inch on the other end, I would find a way to ramp this entire length by 1/8 to 0. So I think one of the most straightforward ways to do it is to use a solid piece of wood and shim out the solid piece of wood so that it's ramped the amount that the degree that you're looking for, and try to support it in as many places as possible with different thicknesses of shims. Send this board through the planer. Now I have a ramped board. I can take out all those shims. I can attach this board onto my sled, or just run the board through all by itself. Doesn't really matter. And that way you can very quickly and accurately create a constant slope. You'll see with this tapering jig was a little bit more complicated because what I wanted the end product to create was a surface that was convex on both sides. So to do that, I had to create a ramped tapering jig that was concave. So you can see I just milled a whole bunch of different shims, and then I just sent them through different amounts in the planer, and then used a flexible piece of 1/4 inch MDF to span the ribs, the different size shims, and create a nice continuous slope. And then I have a little stop on either end here, so that way my stock wouldn't pop off while it was in the planer. But ramping in just one direction is considerably more easy. So this jig should be pretty straightforward to make. Okay, so I'm prepping this board, this poplar board, to ramp it inside the planer. So I've been using double stick tape. I created a double stick tape stop on this end here, and I made sure to apply clamp pressure to activate the strength of that tape because I really don't want this stop popping off in the middle of the planer. On this side, I wanted to build up the thickness of my shims to just a 30-second underneath 3/16. So I used a 3/32 shim and a 1/16 thickness piece of poplar veneer. And I also attached these with double stick tape. I have seen people attach shims with screws or pin nails. For me, I'm always just a little bit skeeved out at the idea of having metal inside my planer. So I prefer to deal with the thickness of the double stick tape, which does slightly throw off my calculations, than to risk using screws or pin nails. Lastly, I have another one of these 3/32 masonite shims, and I'm just gonna poke this underneath the board until I start to feel some resistance. So that way I know my board will be nice and supported, and even if I send this through the planers in the shop, which have those really heavy duty toothed in-feed and out-feed rollers, my board still won't get crushed into a slight curve. It will stay a straight slope. So this meeting a decent amount of resistance right here, so I'm going to make a little tick mark and an arrow. And I can grab my square, draw a line across that sled, apply my 3/32 shim there to support my board. Okay, so keeping my shim nice and square because I don't want to have a more dramatic taper on one side than the other. And now my board should be good to go to start to create this ramp I'm looking for. So once I've made that ramp on my poplar, then I can start just sending my poplar board through to taper my laminate. So it's a two-step process, but it's a pretty quick and improvisational two-step process. You don't have to sink a lot of time or effort into this. Okay, so I have my tapering jig, or at least the first part of my tapering jig, good to go. I have my board pressed into that little stop right at the front of my tapering jig, and that way as the feeders engage with the board and start pushing it through the planer, my board should just butt up against this stop and won't drift around on top of the MDF sled. And then I've also set my planer, because I am tapering and this part of the board is almost 3/16 higher than the other part of my board, I've made sure that my planer is raised high enough that it completely clears both ends at the moment. So I shouldn't expect to begin a cut for at least several rotations. And then I'm just going to keep tapering until all of my pencil marks are gone. Hopefully you can see this, but I now have a board that's fatter on one end and thinner on the other end consistently. So if I take a measurement on the fat end, I have 0.88. Maybe I'll double check on this side as well to make sure side to side it's nice and consistent. 0.87, so I'm off by a few thousandths of an inch. On this end, on the thin end, 0.7 exactly, 0.69. So the difference in thickness from thick end to thin end is almost exactly 3/16 of an inch. So I have my 3/16 laminate, which I don't obviously want to taper to completely nothing, but I can center this right here, draw pencil lines just like when I was making this original ramp, create a little stop block as well. And I didn't mention it originally, but grain orientation is particularly pertinent for this exercise because when my lamination is fed through at a ramp, if I feed it through this way with the grain ramped upwards, the tear out on this thin of a piece of veneer could potentially even the planer could even just eat the lamination up and pull it into the dust collection. So I always want to make sure that my veneer and my grain orientation is ramping upwards as it's being fed into the planer, because my cutter head is cutting towards me. So I want to be petting the cat, keeping the cat happy.